Now, the Hunt Palmer Show.
Yes! I feel like I've been waiting for this my entire life.
You're listening to the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Jolly good fun. Jolly good.
Locking down the middle of the day.
America's favorite daytime fun show.
Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio. This is Hunt Palmer.
Welcome in. Hunt Palmer not coming to you from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city. That'll have to wait a week because we are here on Radio Row for the Super Bowl. Our coverage all week long brought to you by L'Auberge Hotel and Casino in Baton Rouge. And we are fired up to be coming to you from New Orleans as we get ready for a big week here in the Crescent City. Back in the studio, that's where you can find Jacob Beck and Cassie Spazzali. And we're fired up that you're going to be hanging out with us here over the next 2 hours and really the next 5 days. We've got lots and lots to do reacting to a busy weekend in sports. Certainly get to LSU basketball. That was not all that pretty back on Saturday. Got Sonny Shipp coming up. He's, of course, with Go 24/7 talking about LSU's Junior Day. Big weekend for LSU on campus as far as recruiting goes over the weekend. Well, ABC News has sat down with Greg Brooks, who is spoken about the last couple of years of his life and what the situation is regarding the suit that he's filed against a number of different parties, including LSU football. We'll speak about that. I got to talk baseball in hour number 2. We'll talk about 2 spots in the outfield that I've detailed over at LouisianaSports.net. We've certainly got to talk about the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday. We'll do all of that over the next 2 hours. We're brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products each and every Monday. Let's start today the same way we start every day. That's with our Genesis opening drive.
It's time for Hunt's Opening Drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
Let's get things started here, and we do it with the New Orleans Saints. It appears the Saints have their guy. It appears that the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints will, in fact, be Kellen Moore. And that's something we've speculated on for the last 5 to 6 days as the process has drawn on further. Adam Schefter went on the Pat McAfee show and said that, look, barring any sort of setback, Kellen Moore is going to be the guy. And that's the report that we knew was going to come. It was never going to be Kellen Moore is the next head coach of the Saints, because you can't do that while he's coaching a game. Kellen Moore's got a pretty big game to call plays in coming up here in 5 days. So you're not going to 6 days, so you're not going to hear that he is the head coach. That's not official until after the game is over. But we knew at some point somebody would have the news. That's where things are headed, and they are. And what did I tell you from the start with this process? I don't necessarily care to analyze every twist and turn and throw mud on the entire organization every time they talk to somebody who ends up not taking the job. I want the process to play out, and then at that point, we'll analyze whether or not the result is an acceptable one. And there are a lot of layers to this Kellen Moore hire. There are a lot of layers when it comes to Kellen Moore. There are a lot of layers when it comes to the current state of the Saints roster. There are a lot of layers when it comes to the Saints executive team. And so we'll get into all of it. Kellen Moore will take over this Saints organization as a 36-year-old. While that does make him the youngest head coach in the National Football League, it does not make him an outlier in any way. Kellen Moore is 36 years old. Ben Johnson's 38. He just took the Bears job. Zach Taylor's 41. He was younger when he took the Bengals job, obviously, having been there now for 5 years. D'Amico Ryans is 40. Leon Cohen is 39. Sean McVay is 39. Mike McDaniel is 41. Kevin O'Connell is 39. Mike McDonald is 37. He just got the job in Seattle. So it's a young man's game. Yes, Pete Carroll just got hired. Yes, you've got some guys in the league who are older than others. We understand that. But there's a large chunk of the league that has gone to head coaches that are closer to 35 than 55. And that's where the Saints stand with Kellen Moore. I believe that Kellen Moore is a really good offensive mind. And I say that because Kellen Moore has been hired by 3 different organizations to run their offense. He did it in Dallas, an organization that knew him exceptionally well from his time as a player. They immediately trusted him to be the quarterback coach, and then immediately after that trusted him to be the offensive coordinator. He was hired then by L.A. I always want to say San Diego. He was hired by L.A., ran their offense. Once there was a coaching change there, boom, Philly, one of the most respected and well-run organizations in the league. Oh, by the way, they'll be here this week. Said, we want you to be our guy. And he led the NFL in touchdowns in Dallas one season. He's got the Eagles playing really good football on offense. I believe Kellen Moore to be a very, very good offensive mind. And that's a good thing for New Orleans, obviously. He has never had experience being a head coach, and that's the one thing you just can't really know. You can't know if the guy's going to be able to come in, be organized, run an organization, hire coaches, retain the right staff, set the culture, all those things. He's never had an opportunity to do. Mike McCarthy's done it. You know he can do it. But you don't get that benefit when you hire Kellen Moore. So that's a big question mark. And we can debate the merits beyond that until the cows come home, and I'm sure we will as time goes on. But I think probably more importantly is the big picture of the franchise in its entirety. And you all know that the situation right now with the Saints is a bad one. That's not arguable. They're old. That's not arguable. They're way over the salary cap. That's not arguable. They haven't won a lot of football games in the last 3 years. That's not arguable. You can't argue. No one can argue the Saints are in a very good spot. That's impossible. Mickey Loomis can try to sit up there in a press conference and say they haven't done a lot of things wrong and that the injury bugs have been. He can try, but he's the only person that's making that case. Everyone else knows this situation is not good for a myriad of reasons. So you make this hire, and in my opinion, this is a low risk is the wrong word. It's not an urgent hire. And what I mean by that is like Jacksonville better get this right with Liam Cohen or the Trevor Lawrence era is going to end and you're not going to have much to stand on. The Bears have to get this right for Caleb Williams. Ben Johnson has to be right for the Bears. The Saints aren't in that spot because they're not close to competing at the top of the sport. So if this doesn't work and Kellen Moore has got to be moved on from in 2 or 3 years, I don't think you're going to set the organization back in a big, big way. The most important thing right now to me is the salary cap and the draft. That's what has to be done correctly. And I think that there are probably a lot of people that may get there and go, you are hand-waving a head coaching hire in the NFL? Are you an idiot? And that's not an unreasonable thing to say, but I'm stating the case like the Saints aren't going to be that good this year. The Saints are not going to be great in 2 years, I don't think. They've got work to do on the roster before any head coach can come in there and really turn things around. So if Kellen Moore is the right guy, and he does come in and lay a quality foundation, and he does over the course of the next 15 months identify a quarterback, whether it's in free agency this year, via a trade this year, in the draft this year, in the draft next year, if he does identify a quarterback and you push off the dock with Kellen Moore and this new quarterback and things work, that's great. If you don't, and you do accrue a couple of early draft picks, and you do clear your books, and you do make a change at head coach after 2 or 3 years, well, that's the one you're probably going to have to get right, because at that point, the organization will be ready to take off. It's just not right now. There's a reason all these coaches looked at Mickey Loomis and the Saints organization and said, I'm going to go a different direction. Yeah, I want to go coach the Jets. Okay? Yeah, I'm going to sit this one out. That's what you hear from Aaron Glenn and Mike McCarthy. So the point is not like, Kellen Moore isn't going to work out, who cares? That's not the point. The point is, if Kellen Moore works out, great. If he doesn't, well, you've still got some other things you've got to get worked out in the process, and maybe he's a placeholder. That's just the reality of where the Saints are as an organization. And so, to me, that means this is not a high-leverage hire. This is not one they just have to nail. That's the case in Chicago. It feels similar to that in Jacksonville. The Raiders, not close to being good. The Cowboys, with Dak right there, that's a pretty important hire you just made. For the Saints, I don't feel that way. I can't give you a strong take on Kellen Moore as a head coach, other than to say I think he's a good offensive coach and he's never done the rest of it. And anybody who pretends to be able to predict the future in that instance is just blowing smoke. You don't know. What I do know is that the state of the Saints roster means this could be a bridge guy. It could be the right guy. We'll just have to see. And that's because of the situation the Saints have put themselves in, doing business the way they've done business for the last 15 years and more so for the last 4 years when you're trying to rekindle something that was smoldering. So, Kellen Moore, going to be the next head coach of the Saints. Youngest head coach in the league at 36, but very much in a class of peers with a lot of guys around the league who are between the ages of 36 and 41. That's almost half the league is around that age as far as head coaches go. So, it's what we thought was going to be the case. Certainly nothing official until after the Super Bowl was played, but it gives Saints fans a little bit of a reason to lock in on this Super Bowl coming up, because the guy that's going to be handling your organization for the next few years is going to be the guy that's calling plays for Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert and that whole crew up there in Philly. So, Kellen Moore, the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints. That's our Genesis opening drive. Every car on the lot is online at genesisofbatonrouge.com. We are here at the Radio Row for Super Bowl, and it's brought to you by LeBear's Hotel and Casino at Baton Rouge. Step aside. When we come back, we saw a basketball game on Saturday that got really ugly in the second half. And we'll talk briefly about said basketball game, but I do believe there is a far bigger picture that we watched on Saturday, and I want to get to that coming up next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
One Bath and Closets. OneBathAndClosets.com is the website. David Duvall and his team, 30 years redesigning and remodeling bathrooms and closets. Safety is a big, big deal in the bathroom, especially as folks get older. If there's someone in your life who's aging a little bit and you're a little bit concerned about he or she being at home alone, especially in a hazardous spot like the bathroom, call David Duvall and his team. Have them come out. You can mitigate against some of those risks, whether it's a non-slip floor, whether it's a walk-in tub, whether it's a shower that has a bench in it. Any of that may happen for you, and if that's the case, you can go ahead and mitigate against some of that that risk that you've got in the bathroom area. It starts with a free consultation at OneBathAndClosets.com. David and his team will come out and see you, and potentially could finish with a brand new bathroom. It's One Bath and Closets. Check them out online, OneBathAndClosets.com.
The Hunt Palmer Show, live from Super Bowl 59 Radio Row in New Orleans. Presented by L'Auberge Casino Hotel, Baton Rouge.
We'll talk with Sonny Shipp from 24/7 Sports coming up in 15 minutes. Huge junior day for LSU football over the weekend. Had nearly 50 visitors on hand, some very, very high-profile ones as well. So we'll talk to Sonny about the fallout from that. LSU also lost a commitment earlier today from a prospect that did not visit over the weekend and instead was in Oxford. So I think the writing's probably on the wall there. But we'll talk to Sonny Shipp about that coming up here shortly. LSU played a basketball game on Saturday night in the PMAC. They honored the 2000 Sweet 16 team for the 25th anniversary of that squad, and the second half of the basketball game was an absolute laugher. Texas absolutely ran away from LSU, winning the game 89-58. It was a 31-point win from the Longhorns, and they led by 20-plus basically the entire second half. And I could sit here and do a 15-minute segment on what we watched in the game on Saturday. I could talk about LSU's complete ineptitude from the three-point line that continued. LSU was just 2 out of 15. I could talk about the turnovers that plagued this team night in and night out. They had 15 more in the game and only forced 7. I could talk about the defensive rebounding, which has been very, very poor all year long. Texas got to the offensive glass for 10 offensive rebounds and turned those into 16 second-chance points. I could talk about LSU offensively being completely neutered because no starter even had 7 points in the game on Saturday. It was a disaster performance, and I could talk about all that. But I don't think that's the story. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I'm just telling you what I think. And Matt McMahon took over a mess, as we all know. And Matt McMahon put together a first roster, and they did what they could, and they weren't very good, and they only won a couple of games. And then you pushed off the dock, and you got the sanctions lifted, and you went out there last year, and you took a step forward. You went 9-9. And it was very, very easy for you to look at the roster and situation Matt McMahon started with, to look at the first 2 seasons and see an upward trajectory, to look at the recruiting classes that LSU has stacked up where they're consistently in the top 50, and suggest that in adverse circumstances, LSU was moving in the right direction as a basketball program in the most difficult league in the league in the country. It was reasonable to make those conclusions. But Matt McMahon went on every radio show and every press conference that he could find and talked about how it was time to go make the tournament. Didn't come to LSU to make the NIT. And that was the expectation, that LSU would take that step this year. And now you look up and you're 1-7 in the league, and any expectation that the NCAA tournament was even a possibility is gone, realistically. You've won one game against a bad Arkansas team. You have been beaten by all the quality teams on your schedule. A sub-500 SEC-Texas team just came into the PMAC and toyed with LSU. So what does this mean? And what it means is that the momentum that the basketball program had picked up is gone. You're going to have a year this year where LSU very likely wins 2 or 3 league games. You're going to likely be a 3-15 conference team. If they prove me wrong, so be it. I'll be thrilled. But that's what it looks like right now. And that would be completely dissipating any momentum that you have created. Now, if you were in a situation where you had developed young players on your roster and you continue to bring them back and supplement it with more young players like you used to do 10 years ago, and you had what you thought would be a really, really good team next year, you could kind of look at that and go, okay, well, that's a tough year. That's a blip on the radar. But the fact is that there's so much roster overturn every single year, we don't know what next year's roster is going to look like. Well, how do you build that roster? Well, you have to raise money. You have to go get money for NIL to pay players. Where does that money come from? The boosters. When do the boosters give money? When they're excited about the product and they want to continue moving upward. Jay Johnson hasn't had a problem with that. Brian Kelly has no problem with that right now. My belief is, and I'm not a part of any of these discussions, my belief is that Matt McMahon is going to have a really, 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 really difficult time getting anyone to contribute significantly to putting together the next roster. That's my belief. And when Matt McMahon signed up to coach at LSU, I don't think he knew exactly what that was going to entail as far as recruiting goes and what NIL would become and what basketball from a men's perspective means in the pecking order at LSU in terms of fan interest. And you lose that momentum, it's very difficult for me to see Matt McMahon raising enough funds to put together a roster good enough to compete in the SEC next year. And that's a situation that may not be recoverable from. That's just the way I see it. This era is so dependent on energy and momentum and raising funds. And when you've got a program that looks like it's going to come off of a 3-15 SEC run, those conversations are not going to be easy. They're just not. And it's obvious that LSU can't stack up with this SEC this year, so it's really difficult to see that changing. And that's what I felt like I was watching on Saturday night. I don't know what happens if Jalen Reed stays healthy and Tyrell Ward sticks around. I don't. We'll never know. I thought LSU had a pretty good roster assembled. I think Matt McMahon coaches X's and O's pretty well. I think the roster that he has got is not able to stack up with potentially the best conference in the history of college basketball. And every team plays a D game over the course of 18 games. Every team does it. Every team over the course of 18 games has a night where they just aren't very good. And for Auburn, that means you go to South Carolina and you win by a basket. For LSU, that means in a home game against Texas, you get beat by 30. So I'm not saying that one basketball game is an indictment on the entire program. I'm saying that 8 basketball games I've watched make the next 10 basketball games fairly easy to predict. And they don't include 5 LSU wins. Y'all know how much I love that basketball program. I love watching LSU play basketball. I love when the Assembly Center is full and LSU's good, and I love the NCAA tournament. I'm from an era where making the NCAA tournament is far from a guarantee in my lifetime as a basketball fan. I wasn't around in the 80s when Dale Brown made it every year. I love when they're an NCAA tournament basketball team, but when I look at what it takes to make the tournament, what it takes to win 8, 9, 10, 12 games in this SEC right now, it's hard to imagine for me LSU coming up with those funds. I hope I'm dead wrong. I hope there's a fire lit under Matt McMahon and some of the boosters that are not necessarily as giving with basketball, and they decide, hey, we're going to stick some money behind it. But my educated guess, based on living in this state my entire life and understanding what people really get behind and what they maybe don't, is that football program is going to continue to raise a bunch of money, and that baseball program is going to continue to raise a bunch of money, and LSU's basketball booster base isn't as strong. So you're going to miss out on Chris Sinak, which they did, because Tillman Fertitta said, I'm going to have Chris Sinak. And then you get into the transfer portal where you can overhaul a roster like that. Look at Missouri the last 3 years. Tournament team, worst team in the league, okay. Look at Vanderbilt this year. Poof. They're going to be in the tournament. They were awful last year, fired their coach. South Carolina with Lamont Paris. Spiked the first year, make the tournament. This year, can't win a game. It's a volatile sport when you're not playing at the top level. Alabama and Auburn have invested. They're in the top 5 in the country. Tennessee's invested. It doesn't always work. Arkansas has invested this year. They stink. They're terrible. But they invested. And they got a couple guys on that team that are going to be NBA players. And they got 2 guys committed in this class that are 5 stars. But roster building is about that fundraising. And when the momentum of a program stalls, especially one that plays, 3rd, 4th fiddle on campus, it's just hard to restart that thing. And they didn't get beat at the buzzer or because there was a bad whistle on Saturday. They got annihilated on their home floor on a Saturday afternoon on a day where you were honoring a team's 25th anniversary. That was a fairly visible disaster that LSU put out there on Saturday. And as I was sitting there watching it, I was thinking to myself, like, this feels tough to respond to. And I'll be pulling for them on Wednesday. And play at 9 o'clock Eastern Athens time. And I hope they go to Georgia and get a big win. That'd be great. But I'm just going on what I see and what I know. And what I see is a team that's 1-7 in league play. What I know is the league's very unforgiving. And I know that LSU fans are capable of tuning men's basketball out. I'm not. I will watch every dribble the rest of the way. I will talk about it on this show. You may not hear about it much on the other 3 shows, and that's probably for good reason, because I don't know how invested LSU fans are. I am. It just felt like a big deal on Saturday. It felt like a big moment. Hopefully they prove me wrong over the next 2 months. I just have a hard time seeing that right now. We're here at Radio Row for Super Bowl 59. We're presented by LeBear's Hotel, Casino, and Resort Baton Rouge. Our Monday show is always brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products. All your printing, scanning, copying needs, Gulf Coast Office Products, GCOPnet.com, GCOPnet.com. When we come back, Sonny Shipp talking some LSU recruiting. It was a big junior day over the weekend. LSU had some big-time recruits from both in the state and outside the state on campus, plus a decommitment earlier today. If you missed any or all of that, catch us next with Sonny Shipp.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge, genesisofbatonrouge.com is that website. Every car that is on the lot is online at genesisofbatonrouge.com. Look, when you think Genesis, think luxury. I know that when I say luxury vehicle, there may be a couple of brands that pop into your head here or there because they've been around a little bit longer. Genesis hasn't been around as long, but I can promise you this. It is a luxury brand to the letter. Go and by and see them. They're at Airline at Piku, right across from Women's Hospital. Get behind the wheel of a Genesis. You'll see the difference. You'll feel how comfortable it is. Amazing ride. It's sleek and stylish. It's also incredibly safe. The entire line given the IIHA top safety picks. Some of them top safety picks plus. Check out the inventory online at genesisofbatonrouge.com or go by and see him airline at PQ. Genesis of Baton Rouge, genesisofbatonrouge.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products.
We're here on Radio Row, Super Bowl 59 coming your way this Sunday from the Crescent City. We'll be here all week long. We're brought to you by La Berge Hotel and Casino in Baton Rouge. Let's talk some LSU football recruiting here in the next segment. Sonny Shipp from 24/7 Sports, good enough to give us a little bit of time on this Monday. Joins us on the Jim's Firearms Hotline. Sonny, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. I ain't as good as you, though. Big comment at Super Bowl Radio Row.
This is pretty cool, I'll say. We have not done this as a station before, but obviously with the game right down the road, we had an opportunity to do so. There's some fairly high-profile organizations here on set. Little old 104.5, we're over here in our spot, but it's really cool to see, and I'm excited to get the week rolling here. LSU had a big weekend on campus with a junior day, which included some younger players than juniors, but I think it appears that it was pretty well attended. Give us a feeling about 50 folks on hand as far as prospects go, Sonny.
Yeah, and they also were able to get a large portion of the top 10 in Louisiana on campus too. So that really came to that was really good. And the name of the event was Boys from the Boot, which, obviously puts an emphasis on the Louisiana kids. And when you look at 2026 in this state, it's pretty top heavy. You know, guys like Lamar Brown was on campus, Blaine Bradford, the safety out of Catholic High, Jabari Mack, the wide receiver out of Destrehan, he was on campus. All of your commitments were there. And we can really say that after Jaraylin McCroy decommitted today, the Mississippi defensive lineman. And so they had all 5 Louisiana guys who were committed were there. So really, when you look at it, I think it was pretty successful.
So tell me about the decommitment earlier from today when you don't show up on campus and instead you go visit an SEC rival and then that recruitment opens up about 20 hours later. I kind of feel like the writing's probably on the wall. But tell us about the decommitment from earlier today and what that means.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, man. You know, Jaraylin McCroy, he showed up. He's around 6'5", 245, 250, maybe a little bit more than that. But he showed up at LSU's camp, the Brian Kelly's first summer in Baton Rouge. He showed up as a freshman. Everybody's looking at this kid like, oh my God, who is this guy? You know, I mean, he looked like a Greek god. You just don't see freshmen drawn up that way. And unfortunately, though, that was his best moment, because since then he's just continued to slide. And I think that he's a guy that you're going to see eventually slide out of that 4-star rating that he has right now. And look, if there's a position that you feel great about in Louisiana right now for the 2026 class, it's the defensive line, because you've got Lamar Brown, who basically, if everything goes the way it's trending right now, he's going to play on the defensive line at defensive end if he signs with LSU. And the defensive line class is really, really loaded in the state. You've got Richard Anderson, the defensive tackle out of Carr, who is already committed. You've got Dylan Berryman, the big 4-star defensive tackle out of Wassman up around the Monroe area. And you've got some more really talented linemen in this state. And so, I think at the end of the day, fans are going to look back at this and say, okay, who was the guy from Mississippi who decommitted early in the process?
It's interesting that you mentioned Lamar Brown, because he obviously can play both ways for U-High, and depending on what service you may look at, you may see him on the offensive side or the defensive side of the ball. Has that decision in your mind already been made, and kind of has he expressed an interest? What is the coaching staff saying? How do they want to handle the big young man?
You know, he was torn in the beginning of the process. He was kind of torn, and we've got him he's a 5-star pretty much across the board, regardless of which service you look at. And he was, in my opinion, he was equally as talented on either side of the ball when you saw him as a sophomore. I think, as his sophomore year turned into him preparing for his junior year, his focus started to shift more to wanting to play defense. And he told us that his conversations with Bo Davis and Kevin Peoples over the weekend was about defense, was about him coming in as a defensive end, kind of opposite of that speed defensive end, like you saw with Braden Swinson last year. Brown would kind of fit more of that Savion Jones mold. And, that's the direction that he's leaning right now. And if you're LSU, and look, quite frankly, if you're any college coach, you say, I don't know, man, we kind of like you on the offensive side of the ball. Well, you're an idiot. I mean, you're an absolute idiot. You get that kid on campus, you let him play wherever he wants, and you just focus on getting him. I mean, he is that type of guy. And it's not that often that we've seen guys like that in the past. Look, Morris Claiborne came in as not knowing if he was going to play offense or defense. He's just one of an example that we've seen in the past. And I think Lamar Brown is really unique in the athletic frame that he has and his skill set, and that I think he's a 5-star on either side of the ball, and you don't really see that with a whole lot of guys his size.
Yeah, you think about Corey Webster wanting to play both sides of the ball. Marcus Spears was a tight end who they moved to the other side of the ball
Spears,
as well.
Right, exactly. I forgot about that.
Kind of thing happens. I'm sitting next to Jacob Hester right here. They send it safety. I think it was 2 practices, so maybe you can play offense now, Jake. But it's just you get those athletes and you figure it out once they get to campus. I'm with you. Let's talk about Blaine Bradford. Obviously got an older brother in the purple and gold, big-time safety recruit, top 5 by just about everybody at that spot at Catholic High School. How do you think LSU sits for him?
I think LSU sat in a good spot entering the weekend. After Junior Day after the event was over, he spent some extra time with DJ Pickett, the 5-star cornerback who got to campus in late December from the 2025 class. Took part in the bowl game practices and stuff. And I think that's good when you can hook him up with another guy of who went through a lot of the stuff that Blaine is going to go through. Being a 5-star, being one of the best in the country at his position, going to get a ton of already has a ton of offers, going to get a ton of NIL offers. And so being able to hook him up with someone of that stature, and that they can kind of, swap stories and just share experiences, I think is good. And I think something else that's good is that, and this is not a knock on Jake Olson by any means, he's a young up-and-coming position coach is how I look at Jake. And when you're talking about keeping one of the top players in the country in your backyard at home, I think you just, you want to have a little bit of reassurance. You want someone who's got a lot more skins on the wall being involved in that recruitment. And that's something that Frank Wilson has done. Frank Wilson's gotten more heavily involved with Blaine Bradford. So I think you'll see him, Jake Olson, and Blake Baker kind of tag team that recruitment going forward. But one interesting thing that I go back to a 7-on-7 tournament last spring. Jacob wasn't committed he wasn't committed to Houston at the time. Blaine obviously wasn't committed anywhere. And asked him, like, hey, what's y'all's thoughts? Like, do y'all talk about playing together? Is that something you really want to do? And at the time, Blaine said, no, we're gonna do our own thing, and we're gonna go our own paths, and if those paths happen to end up at the same place, then that's fine. So I don't think you look at Blaine Bradford and say, oh, well, his brother's Jacob. Jacob is at LSU. He wants to stay home and play with him. I do think that scenario is going to work out, but it's not going to be just because they want to play together.
This is a tougher question to answer. I kind of just want some general thoughts on. But we've all seen in following recruiting over the years those really special classes in Louisiana that are, maybe 4 or 5 that are just superstars, and then they're more like 11, 12, 13 deep. And those guys kind of form a relationship at camps and form a relationship going to games on the weekends, and they kind of become a big package deal. No more, prominent example of that than the 2011 crew that was labeled the Fam and whatnot. Do you get the sense, I realize this is a really talented group, that there are some good relationships that could work in LSU's favor over the next 10 months?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that 2011 group, because when you said that, that's immediately what I started thinking of. You had Lael Collins, Anthony Johnson, Jeremy Hill, Kenny Hilliard,
Freak Johnson.
Man, and
Trey
I know
Turner.
Trey Turner, yeah, Jonah Austin out of St. Aug. That was one of those classes. I do think that, I think when you look at this 2026 class, I think you have all the makings of a group like that, especially when you've got, Lamar Brown and Blaine Bradford, they're both in Baton Rouge. There's not much, there's not much distance between where they're both residing. So you have that on your side. You also have Elijah Haven, the number one prospect in the country for 2027. He's in Baton Rouge. He's in your backyard too. So you really have a lot of the ingredients to, to developing those relationships. I think you'll see those relationships get a lot stronger as time goes on, particularly when they end up at other campuses for junior days or for visits. You've got summer camps coming over the summer. You'll have official visits that'll be starting up in May. And so, yeah, you have a lot of those ingredients right there. And, and I'll even go a step further and say, you kind of had some of those things in 2014. Granted, Speedy Noel ended up going to Texas A&M. We know about we know about Gerald, and it's kind of remember like, okay, who did he originally commit to? Was it Florida or Miami? But it was Florida. You had Trey Quinn, who ended up in Baton Rouge. Obviously, Leonard Fournette. So, I think that this 2026 class is going to take more of is going to trend more towards that 2011 group, to where they all, most of them all stayed home. And I don't think you're going to have those defections like you had with Speedy Noel and with Gerald Willis. And then we got to remember, Jakeem Stewart reclassified to 2025.
Right.
So if he would have stayed in 2026, I mean, just think about how top-heavy Louisiana would be then. That's
crazy to think about. If we move 1 year forward to 2027, this kind of put a smile on my face as a basketball guy. Ruston's Ahmad Hudson, the son of a former LSU basketball standout Antonio Hudson, who was a great player for LSU in the early 2000s. He's a really, really highly thought of high school tight end in the 2027 class that was on campus, tweeted out a picture from Junior Day. What can you tell us about Ahmad Hudson?
Yeah, I think LSU's in a really strong spot there. I think we're going to see him that he could potentially take a similar path like we see with Trey'Dez Green. Once football season's over, you jump onto the hardwood and you do it there. I guess my biggest, I think the only, if there is a negative that came out of the weekend, it's like, why couldn't the LSU coaches keep him out of the PMAC? Let's keep the momentum going from Boys from the Boot and not make him have to go watch Texas skull crush LSU.
Yeah, I talked about that in the last segment, unfortunately, and that just wasn't great. But yeah, your point is well made. Just keep him over there in the football facility for right now. Last one, another 2027 player, Jaden Miles, a running back there that Frank Wilson had on campus and extended an offer to. What can you tell us about Jaden Miles?
Yeah, I tell you what, when you go back and this is not a knock on Clyde Edwards-Helaire at all, because, I mean, he had a fantastic career at LSU. He had a good career at Catholic High. But I think Jaden Miles is probably going to be the best pure running back, not obviously taking Clyde's versatility out of the equation. But when you just look at the running back, I think he's going to probably be the best one to come out of Catholic High since Darius Geis. He's a big kid. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Jeremy Hill. As far as his stature goes, his how big he is, kind of how fast he is, and to extend that offer, I think was really big to come in person from Frank Wilson. You can, when you've got a Catholic High kid who can play like that, you need to get that offer out ASAP. Yeah. And I'm glad that LSU didn't wait until they saw him in the spring or they saw him during the summer. They also dished out, surprisingly, Corey Raymond went into this weekend without an offer extended to a Louisiana cornerback for the 2026 class. And he did offer one. He played quarterback out of Winsboro as a junior, and that's probably the position he's going to play a lot in 2026, but LSU offered him as a cornerback. Tall kid, 6'2", 170, 175, really fits that mold of Corey Raymond, and you guys might be able to help me with this. I'm trying to think. I think the last kid who really came out of Winsboro with LSU might have been Booger McFarland.
Yeah, I can't think of one. I've been through Winsboro a number of times back in a former life, but I can't recall another one since Booger. So yeah, I mean that one worked out okay. It just took another 30 years to get another one in.
Hey, yeah, maybe the next one will only take 15, right?
There you go, Sonny. We appreciate some time, man.
Absolutely, man. Y'all have a great day, fellas.
Sure will. Sonny Shipp with 24/7 Sports talking about LSU's Junior Day. Boys from the boot back over the weekend. We are here from Radio Row Super Bowl 59 presented by LeBair's Hotel and Casino Baton Rouge. Back to close out our first hour of the week. That's next.
The Hunt Palmer Show. This is The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products.
Closing up hour number one here from Radio Row in New Orleans. Super Bowl 59 coming your way on Sunday. Our team will be here all week long, and because of that, we have LeBair's Hotel and Casino Baton Rouge to thank. Do want to close out the first hour here talking about a sit-down interview that Greg Brooks did with ABC News that is now available online. I'm not sure if it aired on ABC News or not, but you can find it online at abcnews.com. It's a 6-minute exclusive interview there that they've done, and I don't know that there are any further details that have emerged from this little sit down. I think if you were paying attention back during the fall, you understand that there were legal actions taken against LSU, against the medical team at LSU, against the medical team at the hospital, a surgeon, because of the situation Greg Brooks finds himself in. First and foremost, this is a human piece before it's a legal piece and before it's a malpractice piece and before it's a football piece. This is a human who I think it's fair to say, based on the interview and the sit down, is severely compromised at a very, very young age. And that's heartbreaking. It's a terrible situation for Greg and for his family. And that's the most important thing. But certainly we cover LSU's football team, and this involves a former player bringing legal action against the university and the football program. And that is newsworthy. And so it's our job to kind of give some thoughts on that and relay information as we get it to you. But Greg Brooks' team, and I'm paraphrasing all of this, you can certainly go watch ABC News' sit down with him. Greg Brooks, his team says that LSU did not properly get him into the right direction when these symptoms persisted for better than a month. There was nausea, there was vomiting, there was dizziness, there was loss of consciousness. And Greg Brooks and his team are alleging that LSU improperly managed his situation and did not get him into the proper medical hands in the right amount of time. Certainly LSU and its team of attorneys will have their say in that, and quite frankly, like that from my perspective as I sit here in this chair is not relevant. That's something that's going to have to work out in the legal court. For me, I just look at it as a young man who is in such wonderful shape and an amazing player for LSU and had so much in front of him as a person in the very early 20s, and now you look at his speech is significantly slurred. He's in a wheelchair, and it's just heartbreaking to see that happen. Certainly, brain cancer is just a devastating thing very often. And one of the and I use air quotes here, one of the uplifting pieces was Michael Strahan, who conducted the interview. His daughter, who has battled brain cancer, did come in and take part in that to kind of to share her story and her side of things as well. So there are legal details that continue to come out with this that regard the surgery and the decision to do all of that and the symptoms that led up to it and warning signs and all of those things. And that's going to be for the court to figure out. But for me, I just circle back to the fact that it's a heartbreaking thing to see a young person who, as I said, is now severely compromised and will be for a very, very long time. I'm happy that Greg Brooks has come out of it, and he's certainly cognizant and able to communicate in a sense. And there was a time there when he was in the hospital, we didn't have a lot of updates, but that the word that was circulating out was like things are not great. And so you see some of the video that we're seeing for the first time of Greg and of him trying to get around and to write and to use his motor skills and all those types of things. And it can be heartbreaking to look at. So we'll keep you posted as the story develops. Again, I don't know that anything other than the video of Greg himself actually talking and doing some day-to-day things. That's something that I personally had not seen. I was aware of all the legal action that was coming forth, and that hasn't changed, but I think the interview kind of sheds light onto the struggles that Greg Brooks has had since he returned home from the hospital. So you can find all of that at abcnews.com. That'll do it for hour number 1 here from Radio Row at Super Bowl 59. We're brought to you by LeBair's Hotel and Casino in Baton Rouge. Certainly appreciate our friends at Gulf Coast Office Products for bringing you our Monday shows each and every week. All your printing, scanning, copying needs, you can find them at Gulf Coast Office Products, gcopnet.com. That's gcopnet.com. We got plenty to do in hour number 2. I'm excited to talk a little bit about some baseball that we saw over the weekend. We'll do that after Sports Center. It's a Monday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.